there's a huge duty of care that we have to athletes so that they feel ready to pursue life after sport and feel good about their time in sport.
So in Atlanta, we're all euphoric. We've won the bronze medal, you're jumping around, you're crying, you're happy, celebrating with family, and then silver medal, you've lost your final match. And who celebrates that in the normal world of sport?
It just didn't go the way I planned, and there's an assumption that you win 3 Olympic medals, it's something you should be happy and proud of, but I wasn't. And I knew that I needed to get help. The resources are there, and we do everything we can to let the athletes know that they're there. But at the end of the day, it's still the uptake, the onus is on the athlete to know that it's there and take advantage of it.
Welcome to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia. Our mission is to protect the integrity of sport and the health and welfare of those who participate in Australian sport.
Hello and welcome to Onside. I'm Tim Gavel. Well, what a week we've had in sport with the announcement that Brisbane is in the box seat to host the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games after being named the International Olympic Committee's preferred bid. It was great to see crowds at the Australian Tennis Open and at the rugby at the weekend as we look forward now to the start of the NRL and AFL seasons. Sport Integrity Australia's National Integrity Framework will be launched this month. The framework was developed in response to the findings of the Wood Review, which recommended a streamlined approach to all national integrity matters. It's a suite of policies that sets out the expectations and behaviours for everyone involved in sport regarding safeguarding of children, member protection, competition manipulation, sports wagering, and the misuse of drugs and medicines. In today's episode, we take an in-depth look at the issue of mental health in sport. We talk to Clinical Psychologist Mary Spillane, the AIS's mental health lead, about the prevalence of mental health issues and depression in sport, sport's duty of care to ensure the wellbeing of athletes, the silence that can accompany depression, and what's being done to combat the issue. We also talk to our Olympic heroes, basketballer Rachael Sporn and swimmer Daniel Kowalski, about their own battles with mental health, the disappointment of silver, the impact of injury, scrutiny, and being burdened by expectation. In our segment from the highlight reel, we relive the 1500 metres freestyle event at the 1996 Atlanta Olympic Games, where Daniel snatched silver. First up though, Mary Spillane, on the critical role the AIS is playing to improve the mental health of athletes in Australia. Well, Mary, firstly, just having a look at the prevalence of depression in sport, how prevalent is it, given the research that you've done and the work that you do with sporting teams?
So at the AIS, we have looked into the prevalence of mental health issues, including depression in athletes. And what we've found is that around 1 in 3 athletes are experiencing symptoms that would meet criteria for intervention. So 1 in 3 essentially is the number that we believe.
Do you think it's on the rise?
Look, the data would suggest that it is on the rise, particularly in the general community. So the general community, we know it's on the rise, and we believe that athletes, or that the rates in athletes are the same. So I guess it's an interesting sort of question though, because so much has changed in recent years, even in the last decade, around approaches to mental health and depression. So there's a lot more awareness out there now about mental health symptoms and what people might experience. So generally we think that people might actually be more likely to get help. So whether or not its depression is actually increasing or there's more awareness, is an interesting question, but I think it's probably a bit of both.
Do you think that social media is a trigger for this and possibly leads to people suffering from depression and really battling a mental health issue?
Yes, certainly. So particularly for people who already have some symptoms or some mental health issues, social media can be really damaging. And I suppose if you think about it in terms of us as the general population, if you have a bad day at work and you go home and someone's written about how bad you were at work that day, it would be pretty distressing. And when we think about how often athletes are exposed to that kind of media and those sorts of comments, then I think it's a significant stressor.
The silence that can accompany depression, that's a hidden factor here, but also the fact that males tend not to talk about depression as much as females, and I guess that is an issue that you have to overcome in your work, particularly with teams like the Essendon Football Club and the Australian Cricketers Association, etc.
Yes, for sure. And I think, that sort of old adage of boys don't cry has probably not helped, in the past in terms of encouraging men to access mental health. So it's definitely an issue, but I do think that there has been an improvement. So certainly in the work that I've done, females are much more likely to access support for mental health, but we know that males are increasingly starting to access that support.
Yes, the problem is, I guess, with males, they have seen it as a sign of weakness in the past, haven't they?
Yeah, there's been that sort of fear that it's a sign of weakness. So there's that stigma attached to that what will people think of me if I need to get help and put my hand up for help, and perhaps what do I think about people who get help? And is that acceptable? So there are all of these sort of internal and external factors, and there's also just poor mental health literacy. So people, people don't actually recognise when they're experiencing depressive symptoms.
Sometimes I guess it's up to the sports, isn't it? And they have a duty of care to ensure the well-being of athletes, but they need to be well aware of what's happening in their own clubs and own teams.
Definitely. I think we all have a duty of care in our work in sport to look after athletes, and we want to keep athletes in sports that we love to watch for as long as possible, and have them leave the sport feeling mentally prepared and psychologically ready. So there's a huge duty of care that we have to athletes, so that they feel ready to pursue life after sport and feel good about their time in sport.
You mentioned their after sport. That is another factor here too, isn't it? Because obviously dealing with athletes while they're still participating in sport, but beyond their sporting careers, a lot of athletes do suffer depression, don't they?
Yes, and we know that transitioning out of sport is a major trigger for mental health. So it's a really important theme, I think, and something that we do a lot of work in at the AIS. So we have sort of engagement programs. We have a career and education network to try and help athletes to get themselves prepared to manage that transition, because we know that if athletes leave the sport with no sort of career or study or sort of pathway in mind, it's a significant risk factor for poor mental health.
Have you had a close look at the triggers? We mentioned social media there a moment ago, and I guess the burden of expectation, that public profile, but there are many other things, including injury and form, that contribute to mental health.
Yes, absolutely. And there are the same triggers that we would see in the general population, such as, relationship breakdown or work stress and those sorts of things. But then there are some really specific athlete ones too, such as, an injury and rehabilitation, transitioning into sport, out of sport, changing states, living large amounts of time away from home, and then also sort of a lack of non-athlete type identity. So a lot of athletes find that their identity is really wrapped up in being an athlete, and so that can be a trigger for mental health as well.
Another factor too is having spoken to a number of athletes, they look bulletproof on the football field or sporting arena, but they suffer from anxiety. And I know that's one area that you've had a close look at with anxiety disorders in particular.
Yes, definitely. So, like depression, anxiety is a really high prevalence disorder in both the general population and amongst athletes. And there's so much pressure to perform and to perfect. And if they don't perform or they don't do something right, then there's a lot of pressure around why that didn't happen. So we know that anxiety is particularly high prevalence in sport and amongst athletes, similar to depression.
Do you think we're doing enough to combat it and to help athletes through this?
Look, I think we're headed in the right direction, and certainly I think Australia is world leading in our approach to supporting athletes. So the program that we have at the AIS is really robust and solid, and we provide education. So we try and prevent mental health, and then we provide support. So when athletes do recognise signs of mental health, they know where to get support, and we provide that to them free of charge and confidentially. So I think Australia is world leading, and the AIS is world leading, but we do have always a ways to go, and more research and strategy around that is really important too.
Is talking to somebody about it, is that the first step, do you think?
Look, I think being able to recognise that you might be struggling from something is the first step. So in order to get that help, you really need to be able to identify that there is something wrong. So whether it's speaking to, a family member or a GP or some other trusted person and sort of saying, oh, look, I don't know if I feel right, or my sleep hasn't been quite right, or my appetite's been a bit off, and just developing some awareness around what you're experiencing or what is and isn't normal for you is the first step, so that then you can go and get the help you need.
Yes, and the uncertainty surrounding, say, the Tokyo Olympic Games, on again, off again, that really does play on the mind of athletes, having spoken to a few of them. And you wonder, how you get out of something like that, because you can talk to somebody about it, but there is that uncertainty surrounding whether or not they're going to go ahead. But at the moment, of course, the Games are going to go ahead, so athletes are training as they would normally do, but there is that uncertainty.
Yes, and I don't envy them in that regard. I guess finding the motivation to sort of continue training when there was so much uncertainty, particularly last year, and we've done a lot of education around managing uncertainty. And the fact of the matter is it is uncertain. There's a lot in life at the moment that is uncertain, and so how can you manage that uncertainty and find other areas where you can get some control and cope with that, because it's not going away.
Yes, is the theme there, control what you can control?
Yes, absolutely, and not trying to make something certain that just isn't. There's a lot of stress and anxiety wrapped up in trying to get certainty when we just won't get it with some things, particularly around the global pandemic.
Yes, great advice, Mary. Thanks very much for joining us today on Onside, and great work that you're doing at the moment with regard to mental health and high-performance athletes. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
You're listening to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia.
This is Onside. I'm Tim Gavel, and we're currently discussing the issue of mental health in sport. Well, Rachael Sporn is one of Australia's greatest ever basketballers. Rachael won 2 silver and a bronze at the Olympic Games. She played basketball throughout the world, and Rachael Sporn joins us now on Onside. So, Rachael, we look at sports people, we think they're invincible, watching them on the sporting field and on the courts, yet it's far from the truth, isn't it? There's a lot of self-doubt when it comes to injury and form. I guess to a certain degree it contributes to the mental state of a sports person, but I guess how tough is it sort of having that persona, yet at the same time having that sometimes self-doubt, mental health issues in the background?
Yes, it can be a really difficult thing to navigate, Tim, because you're right. The public just see us performing. They don't see us behind the scenes and the demons that we can be battling. And I think every athlete would be lying if they felt at some point they were at a real low And I think it's probably more obvious in different sports. I know we see cricketers when they have a batting slump or bowling slump, just things like that. And I think for me, it helps certainly being in a team environment. I can only imagine like being in an individual sport, how that is magnified. But it was definitely present for me throughout my career.
Can you tell us how you coped with it and what were the triggers for it?
Well, the most significant one for me was actually around the Sydney Olympics. I was playing in the WNBA and 13 months out from the Sydney Olympics, I did my knee. I had to have a full knee reconstruction. And with most injuries like that, you need 12 months before you're back ready to play. So we had to fast track everything for Sydney. And obviously to my relief and delight, I was selected in the team on July 15 and September 15 was the opening ceremony. So when you're part of an Olympic Games, you want those 17 days to be perfect. Unfortunately for me, they weren't. I actually, 3/4 of the way through the tournament, I came down with bacterial sinusitis and I had to be isolated from the team for 4 days. And so I was not feeling great in a couple of games and I wasn't allowed to play in the quarterfinal. I had to sit in the stands to watch the team. And we went on to win silver. So that was amazing in itself. But when I got back to Adelaide and started playing WNBL, I just fell in a heap. I was finding training and games was a chore, which was so foreign to me because I love the game so much. And I was actually diagnosed with post-Olympic depression, POD. There was a name for it. And at the time, I was like, really? That just seemed, I guess, a bit trivial compared to, I know, some depression that some athletes do get. So I went to a sports psychologist and she was actually able to turn it all around for me and made me concentrate on all the positives rather than the negatives that I was concentrating on. The fact that we won a silver medal, all of my family was there to support me in the home Olympics. And so probably about after 6 months, I was able to turn it around. But that was the most, I guess, tested that I ever was. And I was very thankful that I did come out the other side okay.
Yes, well, you went on to compete at the Athens Olympic Games in 2004, 4 years later. But I have spoken to people who have won silver medals at Olympic Games in basketball in the past. And it's a different feeling to winning silver as to winning bronze, because when you win bronze, you actually win and there's a feeling of excitement. But when you win silver, you've lost a gold medal. Did you have the same feeling? Because you won the bronze medal in Atlanta and you won silver medals in 2000 and 2004.
Absolutely, Tim. I totally relate to that. That is so true. So in Atlanta, we're all euphoric. We've won the bronze medal. You know, you're jumping around, you're crying, you're happy. You know, celebrating with family, and then silver medal. You've lost your final match, and who celebrates that in the normal world of sport? But Olympics, you have to remember it's so unique, and so you have to think, wow, we're still the second best team in the world. But it is strange because you're not jumping around euphoric and celebrating that you've won silver. You're disappointed because you've just lost a gold. So I totally relate to that. And it is quite a unique, I guess, situation because thankfully, though, I guess you remember who does win the silver medal. I know we don't remember who lost the AFL Grand Final in 1996, but we do remember, you know, who's won those gold, silver, bronze medals. But it's, yeah, you're right. It's definitely something that tests you. But then so much better than coming fourth, Tim. I think that would be the most difficult situation of all.
Absolutely, yes. So what about the burden of expectation, the public profile? Because basketballers, especially, you know, people with your stature, very tall, people recognise you when you walk down the streets or when you're out shopping. How do you cope with that public profile and people wanting a piece of you, for want of a better expression?
Yeah. I guess because I was never on the same level. It was always amazing when you're at the Olympic Games and you'd find out, you know, how many people were writing to you or emailing you, and I'd, you know, probably get 100 emails or lots of postcards, and then you'd find out that, you know, Kathy Freeman got, I don't know, 30,000 or something. I don't know. So so many other athletes on a different level or a high level, but in Adelaide, it was a really lovely thing for me. I guess the recognition was so well received because everyone was very genuine. And I think because I was before the age of social media, Tim, you couldn't read any negative thoughts that people were putting down about you. So I escaped that a bit. But I certainly went through times where if I wasn't playing well, that I found that really difficult and probably didn't so much want to be around everyone. And I think the hardest point in my career was 1992 when we didn't qualify for Barcelona. That was so hard because I was 24, ready to go to my first Olympic Games, and we didn't qualify. The women had come fourth in Seoul in 88. So there was expectation that we were going to do well. So we felt as a group that we had failed. And I remember how hard it was coming home. And I'm from a little country town in Murrayville, and they were pinning their hopes on me having their first Olympian. And so it was really, really hard going home actually to see everyone because, it definitely felt like a failure. And I guess Basketball Australia, they appointed Robbie Cadee. The coach often gets the blame. They appointed Tom Ma. And, I guess we all turned it around and we had to stay positive as a group. So that definitely made a difference. And, of course, from that point on, we started to have amazing success.
Did you have a fear of failure? Is that what you're saying there? You're worried about how it was going to be perceived because you felt as though you'd failed?
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just that personal failure because then Basketball Australia doesn't get the funding because we didn't finish well. So it's very far-reaching when you are playing for Australia on an international level about all those things. You are thinking about those things as a player because moving forward, that funding is so important. And I guess on a personal level, I've always been, worried about what other people think. So I tend to let that get to me a little bit too much at times. So I think that's why it was so difficult with all those factors, put into the same basket.
Tell us how you coped with it, because you mentioned a moment ago that you did see a sports psychologist and that effectively focused on the positives. But tell us how you got through it and how it has helped you later in life, post your playing days.
Yeah, I think it's so important I'm a very positive person, I guess, overall, and positive self-talk has definitely helped me over my career, and I've had an amazing support network, and I have been able to talk about how I'm feeling, with my partner or with my sister or with a best friend. So I haven't bottled it up, which I think is really important. And I know people talk about that now. You've got to share how you're feeling and tell a mate, ask them if they're okay, all that sort of stuff. So that was something, thankfully, that I did do. And I certainly post my career, I was very aware of, how retired athletes can really get depressed and find it hard because you do lose your identity. And the world of being an elite athlete, it's a pretty amazing world. You get a lot of adulation, pats on the back, public attention, this addictiveness to winning and being successful, and suddenly all of that stops. So I was very determined when I retired I wasn't going to let that affect me. I was already a mum, so I think that really helped me. And then I wanted to have another child when I did retire. So for me, that transition ended up being okay because I had a real purpose in being a mum. I stayed involved in basketball through commentary and junior coaching. So for me, I did have a plan, and I thought that really helped me.
Yes, because you've got a daughter who's an up-and-coming basketballer as well, haven't you?
Yes, so Taya is, so she did all the juniors, all the districts, the classic tournaments in Melbourne. So at the moment, Tim, she's just playing for fun in under-23s here. She told me probably about 12 months ago she didn't want to play at the elite level, so that was fine. It is for the fun, and so it's still wonderful being able to go and watch her play.
Rachel, can you tell us what you're doing these days? You've got a role with Sport Integrity Australia amongst other roles that you have in the community.
Yeah, I need a lot of stimulation, Tim. So I like having a lot of I've got a lot of different part-time roles, and obviously with Sport Integrity Australia, being a clean sport educator, I absolutely love it because I'm back in the elite sporting environment, presenting to athletes. I'm talking about passion of, keeping sport clean. So having that role for the last couple of years has been so satisfying. I'm also a presenter for Olympics Unleashed with the Australian Olympic Committee. So that's a wonderful role because we get to go out to schools and talk about our Olympic journey and share, resilience stories and goal setting and all that sort of thing with the kids. And I'm still commentating with ABC Radio for all the NBL games played in here in Adelaide. So that diversity for me is wonderful. And I guess a great role I had was the CEO of the Australian Melanoma Research Foundation for 6 years. So being involved with a not-for-profit charity and just understanding what goes on behind the scenes and organising an event, because we had events, and it just makes you realise, even organising a World Cup like next year in Sydney, how much work has to go into something. So, and I'm actually very proud to be also involved with the World Cup on the Legacy Committee as part of the Opals Alumni Program. So that's wonderful leading into that next year.
Certainly keeping busy. Just what messages do you give to athletes you're educating about being clean sport athletes? But as well as that, what sort of questions do you get in return? What do people want to find out from you? What do athletes ask you?
Well, I guess the main reason for this education is to just rule out athletes doing accidental or inadvertent doping, because when I joined, which was then known as ASADA, I was blown away by the fact that 25% of cases that came across ASADA's desk, the athletes didn't mean to generally do anything wrong. And that's what they're trying to really stamp out, because that's what breaks your heart when you have to ban someone who generally didn't mean to do anything wrong. And I guess with athlete supplements is the big issue. So the athletes always have quite a few questions about the supplements, and we just say, please don't take them. Yeah. It's just take the risk out of anything, and you can get what you need through your food and your rehydration and your recovery and training. So that's a really basic, information and education, but it's always worked. And the athletes, they come back to you with some pretty amazing questions. Obviously, the drug testing process is a big one too, particularly for those that have never been tested, because it can be so daunting, particularly if you're under 18, because, going to the toilet is a very private thing. And when you become an elite athlete and you have to be drug tested, that is taken away. So it's knowing their rights and responsibilities. So that's often something we're asked a lot too.
Yes, can add to the stress, can't it, of an athlete preparing for major competition or post-competition. Rachel, some great advice there to finish off. And thanks very much for joining Onside today, and all the best in your many roles.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Well, this is Onside. We're currently discussing the issue of mental health in sport. And in 1996, Daniel Kowalski won medals in 3 different disciplines in the pool, the 200, the 400 and the 1500 metres freestyle. He's currently the Olympian Services Manager with the AOC, and he joins us on Onside. And Daniel, you're helping the current generation navigate quite a tricky world of sport at the moment. It was a battle that you faced for many years as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, hindsight is a wonderful thing, and I know nowadays I would have done things a lot differently, but I was of the mindset that unless everything that I did was 100% focused to achieving the best swimming physical outcome I could get, then that's exactly what I would do. And I really feel as though I put too much focus on the physical and not enough on the mental.
Do you wish that you'd sought help earlier in your career?
Yeah, I wish I was able to see past the whole bravado and that getting help was a sign of weakness and vulnerability. Very fortunate, back in the day when I was swimming, the evolution of the athlete career and education program, the psychological support, it was all there. But I feel as though it was ingrained that you getting that support and help was actually a bad thing.
Because you burst on the scene from memory as a 16-year-old, didn't you? You just missed selection in the 1992 Barcelona team in the 1500 metres. So you're very much a champion swimmer from a very early age.
Yeah, it's funny. It happens really quickly, and when you're not developed physically or mentally to be able to sort of Well, in my experience, to cope with all those peripheral and external things, you had the innocence of it was just a matter of stepping up on the blocks and swimming. But it's obviously far more complicated than that when you're getting to the point where getting the opportunity to represent your country. And for me, that naivety and that sort of big starry-eyed sort of look was valuable in some aspects, but it was also detrimental in others.
Yes, I did read a quote the other day from you, promoting balance in lives and being true to yourself and all that sort of thing. And you said you can't help feel like a hypocrite when you haven't been doing it yourself. Is that a reflection on the sexuality aspect or the mental health and not seeking help? Or what were you talking about there?
A combination of both. I think definitely from the mental health and the support coming back from, in particular the Atlanta Olympics, where, I did go in with, my own expectations and probably other people that to win the 1500, and then that didn't happen, and it just didn't go the way I planned. And there's an assumption that you win 3 Olympic medals, it's something you should be happy and proud of, but I wasn't. And I knew that I needed to get help, but like I said, I just saw that as a sign of weakness and vulnerability. And I didn't want to deal with the fact that I needed the help, and I didn't acknowledge or recognise that it was the right thing to do. It wasn't until a lot of years removed that I realised that I was actually doing myself more harm than good by not getting that help. And obviously through eventually getting that help and coming to terms with who I was as a full person, so recognising my sexuality and that I'm gay, what that did was sort of release all the floodgates of sort of other things that I was going through at the time. But everything that I put down to was the fact that I came second at the Olympics, when I know that wasn't necessarily the full case.
Have you come to terms with it now, do you think? Because because you did go through a lot, didn't you, post Atlanta, and I just wondered sort of whether or not it lives with you, or whether or not you can completely erase that part of your life to a certain degree, where the demons really did impact on you.
Yeah, no, it probably took about 10 years. It took 10 years to reconcile the Olympic performance and something that I was proud of and could openly talk and be proud of it and share the vulnerabilities that I felt pre and post. And that coincided with accepting who I was as well. And, being able to verbalise being a gay man took a long time. But, I'm more than comfortable now, and I feel very fortunate that I've been able to, in some instances, combine my learnings both professionally and personally, and being able to offer guidance or assistance or advice or whatever it may be for those young and aspiring.
You've become a very important, advisor to a lot of people involved in sport. They do seek your advice, as well as being a human rights advocate. It feels very much like you're in that space, doesn't it, as the Olympian Services Manager, helping athletes basically guide a very tricky pathway.
It is a very tricky pathway, and I think the fact that we have roles throughout the sporting network, whether you're an athlete wellbeing and engagement manager through the IAIS and those roles, or in my roles or similar roles at Paralympics Australia or the Commonwealth Games Association, the resources are there, and we do everything we can to let the athletes know that they're there. But at the end of the day, it's still the uptake, the onus is on the athlete to know that it's there and take advantage of it. And it's different for every individual. These conversations, like it or not, need to start earlier in the pathway, because you can't be getting to a point where we've seen in the last year that you have a global pandemic and then all of a sudden your world's turned upside down for something that's totally out of your control. As opposed to you miss an Olympic or Paralympic Games and then what am I going to do? these roles and people are there for a reason, and educating them to tap into it is something that is still a challenge, though.
Yes, there is a fair bit of bravado, especially when it comes to male sports, and you've got to have this air of invincibility, and any sign of seeking help is seen as a weakness. Got to get rid of that in a lot of sport, haven't you, especially in male sport?
Exactly right, and I think it's compounded now because you have a number of platforms in which you can demonstrate your best life through a photo on an app, for example, and that may not in fact be the case, and it is a cover or it is a way of making yourself feel good, but we know that that's definitely not the case. And so how do you drop your guard and show an element of vulnerability that doesn't compromise performance? And I think it takes role models or people to lead the way to be able to do that. And I think it is happening slowly over time, but a career is so short in terms of an athletic life that if you don't capitalise on it earlier, then you're really wasting opportunities and your best athletic years.
You also had to battle injury and illness, didn't you? I remember you had glandular fever. I think at one stage there you had food poisoning, viral infections. I tend to think and remember that you had shoulder surgery as well. And it was, overcoming those barriers as well as, whatever else was happening, whether it be form or, sort of how you're getting on in life. You had to overcome a lot of other stuff as well.
Yeah, the shoulders were probably the most debilitating and draining from a mental point of view, because physically, the one thing that is paramount in the sport of swimming is your arms, and not being able to use them and get a training base that I required was ultimately why I chose to sort of hang the swimmers up, because I couldn't get to the level that I needed to get to, keeping in mind I'm trying to keep up with the likes of Ian Thorpe and Grant Hackett. Like, if you don't have our optimum performance, it was never going to happen. So for me, that was probably the hardest thing that I dealt with in my career.
Yes. Why do you think swimmers seem to have issues post-Olympic careers and post-swimming careers? Is it the sport itself, or is it other issues involved there? Because it can be a very lonely sport, spending so much time virtually by yourself, swimming back and forth along that black line.
Yeah, it's a catch-22, isn't it? Because we know about the more recent cases, sadly, Scott Miller in recent days, because it is a high-profile sport. I don't know statistics, but I think because of a profile, it's more likely to get a run in the mainstream media, but it doesn't mean that it's the only sport. I think a lot of sports are very siloed in the sense that it is you against, the rest of the world. But I think that's the nature of sport. You have traits and characteristics that separate you from the rest of the country, the rest of the world, that help you get to that point. It's being able to find that balance. It's being able to surround yourself with a great support network. And those things are not easy, as we've seen, sadly, for some of my teammates and fellow Dolphins. But how you solve that, obviously we're still trying to figure out. And as I've alluded to a couple of times, the resources are there, but it's not just for the athletes, it's for the entourage and those people around. They need to be acutely aware of what is available as well.
Yes, you're absolutely right there. The promotion of the positives is very important. Daniel, just wanted to go back to 1996 from the highlight reel, and you became the first male swimmer in 92 years to win medals in the 200, 400 and 1500 metres freestyle. We might go back and listen to that final in 1996 in Atlanta in the 1500 metres, and what a great battle it was, because at one stage there, heading towards the home straight, you were in third place in that great battle with Graham Smith. Kieran Perkins out in front, but here it is, a little of that race.
Coming down to complete 1400, Kieran Perkins is well clear. Smith is second, Kowalski is third. And he's got a lead of about 20 metres.
Daniel's got to get the bit between his teeth. We can go 1-2 here. Come on, Daniel, fight for that silver, son.
Yep.
And look at Kowalski coming for the silver. Go,
Kowalski
Daniel.
coming after Smith. will bring Perkins in, about 15 metres to swim. This is rare goal. The best kind of goal. Perkins goes in first. What a great win. And a race for second, a race for the silver. Smith and Kowalski, they come down to the wall after 1,500. Yes! Kowalski got it.
Great finish. I was there poolside. I remember it so vividly, even to this day. And Perkins on one side of the pool, you in the middle. I think in the end, your time was 15:02.43 and Graham Smith's was 15:02.48. That's how close it was at the finish. And you just had this Herculean 50 metres left in you to win the silver medal. It was a great performance.
Yeah, it's funny because whilst I've come to terms with the performances and proud of them, it doesn't mean that I'm still not disappointed. That time was, 10 seconds slower than my best, and Olympic Games is you want to beat your best. And I guess if I wasn't at my best, I would have beaten Kieran on the day, but Kieran was far from his best as well. So. And just showed you what a true champion he was, the mental toughness that he was able to invoke to be able to get himself up to do that was incredible. So I am proud of it, but it sort of means I'm not disappointed.
Yeah, so you mentioned there, if you'd been at your best and 10 seconds beyond your best time, if you had recorded your best time, of course, with Kieran, I think, doing 14:56, so you would have been well in front of him there. And he only just made it through to the Olympic Games in the first place through the qualifying at the Australian Championship. So it was both of you, an amazing story just where you finished up. It was a good field too, though, wasn't it? With as well as yourself, you had Hoffman, Brambilla, you had Smith there who finished third, Neathling. Very quality field. It was one of the highlights of the Olympic Games in terms of theatre. How do you reflect on it now? I know you're disappointed that you didn't win the gold medal, but how do you reflect on that race? Have you been able to analyse it and sort of go through it over these years?
I've never watched it in its entirety, and I don't know if I ever will. But I'm extremely grateful and proud to have been a part of it, because, as I just touched on, Kieran's performance, considering, as you mentioned, he only just sort of scraped into the team, and then his heat literally just scraped into the final. I think what he demonstrated is an incredible lesson for young athletes and just those who need to draw on mental strength to be able to achieve a goal or outcome. That right there is the perfect example. I think along with someone like Kathy Freeman's race in 2000, when you're dealing with those external pressures, he had the internal ones. And for him to be able to do that, it's textbook. It's what you want to be able to show people about the power of the mind. And for me, whilst I got second, I love the fact that I was still able to get on that podium and hear the Australian anthem played. Those little things are really important, and it's the things that no one can ever take away from you, and I take solace in that.
What did it mean to you to win medals in the 200, 400 and 1,500 metres freestyle? As I say, becoming the first male to do so in 92 years. That is incredibly significant.
Yeah, the 200 was probably the one I was most proud of because, I wasn't even really earmarked to make the final. So to get the medal was an absolute bonus and the most fun of them all. If I could have any of them over again, I'd probably take the 400 over the 1,500 to do again because I had that perfect combination at that point of time of speed and endurance. It's what sat between my ears that let me down. But I think I was a part of an era that was extremely successful. And so you're surrounded by so many incredible swimmers achieving incredible results. So I never really felt as though what I achieved was anything noteworthy because of what my teammates were achieving. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of years removed, to put it into perspective and be something that I'm proud of.
Just as a final question, as you reflect on your Olympic career, it sounds like you really come to terms with the fact, what happened in Atlanta, but there must be an incredible sense of pride in what you did when you reflect on what you did.
There is, and I'm very fortunate because I get to work in the environment on a daily basis, and you see the lengths that athletes go through, the support that they get and guidance from their coaches and support staff and their families, and it really puts into perspective what myself and those around me did for me to be able to get that end result. So there is that sense of pride, but also it's also motivation for me to be able to assist and provide an environment on a daily basis for those who are still trying to achieve.
Yes, Olympians of the future, certainly in good hands with you around, Daniel. Thanks very much for joining us today on Onside, and well done on your career and doing some great work with the Olympic Committee and the Olympian Services. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Tim.
And now for our segment From Left Field, where we answer a question from the public.
Hi, my name's Annabelle. I'm a competitive sport climber and an athlete educator. The question I have from Left of Field today is, do you find out the results from your drug test immediately or later on? You won't find out the results of your blood or urine sample until the lab has had time to run all of the necessary tests. You will only be notified if you test positive to a banned substance, so no news is good news.
Thanks for listening to Onside. I'm Tim Gavel. See you soon for the next episode, and episodes are released monthly.
You've been listening to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia. Send in your podcast questions or suggestions to media@sportintegrity.gov.au. For more information on Sport Integrity Australia, please visit our website www.sportintegrity.gov.au or check out our Clean Sport app.